Hello, my name is Shane Broderick and I am the Director of Studies here at On Training, as you can see above. Today we're going to be talking about communication, HR communication in English. And this is targeted towards members of the Human Resource Department in Spanish-speaking countries, and their objective will be to welcome international talent, as the title says. So let's start the presentation. I'm going to share the screen momentarily and just make sure that I'm on the right side of the screen. Okay, perfect. All right, so this is our title, and this is our title, and these are the details. So my name is Shane Broderick. As I said before, I'm the Director of Studies, and these are my contact details if you ever want to get in touch with me about this webinar, about our Human Resource Intensive, which I'll be mentioning later on, and of course for any other consultation regarding training in languages and communication with On Training. Okay. So let's get into the presentation itself. The first thing we're going to take a look at are the contents. After I've introduced myself, we'll have a look at Welcome to the Family, which is a section on introducing our newest team member, hailing from the UK. So we'll take a look at that. Then what are we here for? This is, let's say, the point that we want to get across in this presentation. So imagine you have brought somebody new into your company. You also need to go over what the expectations that you have as an individual, as a company, what they might have as an individual, and try to understand where things fit, let's say, on the first day, so that we have the best possible start with our new team member. Then communication breakdown, as a question is it possible that there's a communication breakdown? There's always a possibility that we have a communication breakdown. So where might we find one for Spanish speakers of English? Where might we see some common errors, or where might we see some issues where it may affect to a large degree the overall communication quality between you and your new team member, and where might that be the source of confusion, misunderstandings, and later on possibly conflict. So we're going to look out for those obstacles to overcome. And then finally, we're going to take a look at the key strategies. So the key strategies will be ways in which we can overcome our communication difficulties, while also focusing on how do we present our case or our company to the new team member. And at that point, the question and answers and the intensive course will stop the recording at the end of key strategies. But yeah, let's get into it. So like I said, I'm going to introduce myself very briefly. My name is Shane Broderick. I am Irish and I have been living in Barcelona for the last 8 years, and during that entire time I have been teaching English, and during the last 2 years I have been the Director of Studies in 2 different companies. So the languages I speak: English, un poco de español, algo de a bit of Irish and Spanish as well. So I also love animals and nature. I have a pet dog and I like to go hiking with her, so that solves 2 of my problems when it comes to making myself happy, getting out in the outdoors with my dog. I also love going to see live music and live performances. I have lots of very creative friends, very artistic people that I like to surround myself with. And there's always something to do at the weekends, or at least once every couple of weeks, to see my friends and to see some music and performance. So that for me is very entertaining. So with that in mind, I am a person that likes to appreciate small details. So this is what I focus on when I'm in my teaching mode. I like to look at small details and how we can improve those things a little bit while we move on in the process of learning. So we're going to apply a little bit of that today, and we're going to introduce our new team member. So when we're onboarding our new international talent from other countries, it's very likely that they'll have come from a background where maybe Spanish culture or Spanish communication or even the Spanish language might not be their strength. And vice versa, coming from the point of view of human resources, they might be bringing cultural differences, linguistic differences, which is what I'll be focusing on more today. to the new team, which, as always, when there's a misunderstanding, it's the source of conflict. So our job as human resource managers or human resource representatives, and the job of the new talent, is to establish a sense of understanding, and from that, trust, and then more productivity comes from when you trust somebody, you're more likely to do the things that they require of you, and so on. So the first and most important thing for me is understanding. So let's get to know our very first new member of the team. So this is Theodora. As we can see, she's affectionately known as Theo, and I will be referring back to her as Theo throughout the rest of this presentation. She's a recent addition to your multinational team. She's coming from the UK, and she brings a lot of background in project management and client relations. So she'll be taking on a role as the International Transport Logistics Manager. That in itself is a very complicated job title. Imagine how complicated her job actually is. So understanding where you are in relation to her is going to be very, very important. As the HR team, you'll be taking charge of integrating her into the wider company. Then you may encounter some communication challenges, and that's what we're going to be taking a look at a little bit later. But first, we need to know, how are we going to establish everything with Theo? And that's going to come in for what I said before, establishing the objectives and expectations of the company very, very clearly. So, establishing company objectives and expectations. It's very important that you know what you're supposed to be doing when you start a job. It might sound silly to have that as a case, but oftentimes the same job position and the same job title carries different responsibilities and different contexts and different understandings when you're talking about distinct companies. My personal experience is Director of Studies here at On Training, as it is a business-to-business company, is very different from when I was the Director of Studies in an academy, where the client would be a very different profile, where the teacher will be, or the trainer will be a very different profile, and also the day-to-day responsibilities, because every company has its own internal culture, its own internal linguistics, and even though in lots of areas there's overlap when you're talking about the same industries, you tend to have the same vocabulary, but even within a company there might be small differences. So establishing that information to your new member of the team, or at the very least establishing your interpretation for them to understand, will go a long way in helping that new person, in this case Theo, understand her objectives and the expectations that the company have of her. So it's a very important first onboarding meeting, isn't it? So let's take a look at what we're going to talk about in terms of Theo's expectations, because like I said, Theo's coming from a different company background, and therefore the culture is different. So it's very important to understand, first of all, how she understands her objectives and the expectations that the company have of her. So there'll be skills that you'll need to know, like asking the right questions and practicing, well, some things that we'll be talking about later on in the presentation. Establishing individual expectations isn't to say that we're going to sit down and with Theo, we're going to write out the expectations. We're going to talk about all of the expectations on day one. It's more to get to understand how she sees her role within the company and how she sees the responsibilities that will be given to her or that have been given to her in her new position. Because even like I said, if it's the same job title, the same position within the company, when you change company and change company culture, there are going to be differences. So understanding where those differences are can really establish a nice concrete base from which you can refer back to in the future. So understanding her expectations and understanding that those might change. So in the first month or 2 months, maybe your expectations might stay the same, but maybe after 6 months, maybe after a year, after 2 years, as the work changes, as it evolves, as Theo evolves in her position, maybe she is starting to understand the expectations of her have changed, and maybe it's good to have somewhere to begin. So making sure that you take very careful note of Theo's basic understanding of the company at the beginning can save a lot of potential confusion and conflict later on in her career and in your collaboration with her. So when we're doing that, we have to be careful of some of the possible hiccups, of some of the possible obstacles and challenges that we want to discuss. So we're going to take a look at communication breakdown. So, like it says in the subtitle, identifying language barriers. Between Spanish and English, there are quite a lot of similarities, but where there are similarities, there are also differences that look like similarities. So we're going to take a look at that first. And those similar looking things that are actually different, we refer to in terms of vocabulary as false friends. So, for example, if you want to talk about the success of a company in Spanish, you might talk about éxito when you are speaking in Spanish. So éxito, although is a very positive connotation in Spanish, has a very different meaning in English if you translate it letter for letter. So éxito and exit, which is salida or salir, might be interpreted a little bit differently by Theo if we don't get the right vocabulary across. So that's what a false friend is. That's our first example. So these words, they resemble familiar terms in different languages, but they carry distinct and very different meanings. So like we said, from Spanish to English, you might have éxito, or for example, you might ask Theo to assist a meeting. And that might confuse Theo because she hasn't gotten any of the notes for the meeting, she hasn't gotten any of the preparation done for the meeting, and perhaps she is not prepared. And it might cause a little bit more confusion if during that time that Theo attends the meeting rather than assists the meeting, that she tries to contribute to the meeting even though she's new. That might be a little bit confusing for her, and that might be a little bit frustrating and for you and for maybe the other team members who don't understand why Theo is assisting the meeting rather than attending the meeting simply. Okay, and carpeta, for example, we put our documents in a folder. We put our feet on a carpet. A carpet is something that you put on the floor to walk and to soften the floor a little bit. So if you're asking Theo to put that document in the carpet, she might be a little bit confused at first. So understanding and identifying those distinct words that are in Spanish different to what they are in English goes a very, very long way in helping to reduce misunderstandings. And also, Theo might say some things that are not okay or that might be misinterpreted. So Theo has just started learning Spanish because she wants to get into the culture of work here in Spain, and she's trying to explain herself and she messes up the word and she feels so embarrassed and she says, "Estoy embarazada." Unfortunately, for Theo, that meaning might have a different connotation and a very different understanding of the next 6 to 9 months of her stay in the company. So instead of talking about how she feels bad because she says that, or she says something incorrectly, she is now in fact told us that she is pregnant. As we said, that might have implications further down the line if the misunderstanding isn't resolved pretty quickly. And it's also very confusing if people congratulate you after you express embarrassment in English. She also describes herself as a very sensible person, which means that some of the workers might feel like they don't want to say something out of place for fear of making her feel upset or whatever. Where in fact, sensible is not sensible. It's a person who is logical, who thinks, who uses their best judgments to come up with solutions to an issue or a problem or a challenge. And also another thing that she might say when she's talking to somebody, she's like, "I'm very sorry, I'm a little bit preoccupied at the moment," which might make somebody feel bad for her, might want to ask her, does she need help? When she just needs to be left alone, because in English, preoccupied has a much lighter meaning, preoccupied, being more distracted rather than worried, which is the meaning in Spanish. So being aware of these little, I would say, subtleties, because they can be very subtle differences. For example, between preoccupied and preocupado, they do have similar meanings, but the difference in the meaning is where the confusion has its place. Okay, so understanding these subtleties is crucial, and ensuring that the clearest form of communication is used and avoiding unintentional misunderstandings. We don't want to be congratulating poor Theo if she feels embarrassed about her work. We want to be supportive of her. We want to give her the right meaning, the right feeling of being in her new workplace. And especially multicultural workplaces, this added attention to detail and empathy can go a long way in improving the overall experience for Theo and for you as the HR department and HR managers. The next thing, pronunciation. So I personally don't find pronunciation to be a big issue, but I have to remind myself constantly that I've been living in a Spanish-speaking environment for 8 years, and I can distinguish between the sounds, and I can understand what somebody might want to say when they are saying something with a Spanish accent or Spanish intonation. So going back on that, Theo, who has had previously 0 to very little experience learning Spanish, she's still misunderstanding the differences between some words and other words, and so you can tell that she might not be as confident with her ability to understand somebody when they speak to her. So common pronunciation errors are not immediately a danger, as I've written, but in some critical conversations, mispronouncing some words might lead to miscommunication or misunderstanding or mishearing important information that could strain relationships in the team. Imagine I want to communicate something to somebody, but they don't hear everything that I want to say perfectly. In English, it is very important to have the sounds to make every word distinct, because there are lots of words that are very similar. For example, words like bear and bear. One is an animal and one means to carry, and they're spelt and they sound the same way. So having the right context, having the right pronunciation can be very, very important. You have the I sound. In Spanish, it's simply I. Whereas in English, there's a little bit on one side and a little bit on the other. So you got like ship, and then you've got E like sheep. And they're very different sounds because one of them is a boat that you can sail and the other one is an animal that eats grass. So that's one example of pronunciation. Another few examples might be the B sound. Now, in Spanish, that V doesn't exist. It sounds like you're trying to use the word F, but you're vocalizing. So it sounds a little bit different, and it's strange because you're not closing your mouth fully, which is something that as a Spanish speaker is not familiar to them. So when they're making that particular sound. So instead of going B, for example, vocal, we might say in English V, vocal, vowel, V. So instead, you're pressing your teeth against your bottom lip and you're pushing the sound out with the vocalization by moving your vocal cords. The OR sound. So this is an interesting one because with 3 different main dialects that I can come up with right now, Irish because I'm from Ireland, the British accent, that being the standard Cambridge accent, let's call it, and the American standard, let's call it the Californian accent, maybe is the most familiar accent because of all of the TV and movies that come from there. So even those 3 have different OR sounds, but they're very distinct from the rolled OR in Spanish, the R. So it is important because sometimes when pronouncing certain words, using the correct sound will allow you to speak more freely, more clearly, more comfortably. And when you are using the wrong pronunciation, cuando estoy hablando en español así, when I'm speaking in Spanish like that, slowly it's fine. But if I try to do the same thing with my Irish intonation, it can create kind of a jumbling of words. Words come crashing together and sounds come crashing together. And maybe I don't say the words I want to say correctly. And the ones that are really, really important that I need to pronounce well so that they cannot be mistaken for a different word, or they might not be mistaken for something else, can get lost in the jumbling. So being aware of the R sound, or the or, and the of English, or in the UK, or in the Americans, or. So there's a little bit of a difference between all of the different sounds. And then the S with the consonant. So for example, in Spanish, you might, or in Spain, rather, not in Spanish, in Spain, when I speak to some non-native English speakers that come from a Spanish-speaking background, they won't say Spain, they might say Espain. Or instead of stop, they might go stop. Or spring, they might go spring. It's because this S and consonant sound that we have in English, st, sp, sk, these sounds don't really translate into Spanish, because normally there's an E at the beginning of those words. Even when we talk about the language, we don't say español, we go español. So you can even hear it there in the most basic term of the language. We don't have that at the beginning of the S and consonant sound at the beginning of words. Then you have silent letters. So English decided to go to a higher level of difficulty because they can, and they decided, let's talk about silent letters. So, for example, you might see the word C-A-L-M and you might want to say calm or calm, but actually in English it's just cam. C-A-M, almost the sound. So the silent L's, the silent B, for example, at the end of the word lamb, cordero, lamb, lamb. You wouldn't say lamb. You wouldn't say bum. You would say bum. These things are everywhere in English, and you want to know the difference before you start saying your would, could, should. As you can hear, there's a strain in my mouth when I'm trying to use these words with the L sound inside, because it doesn't really belong, that sound, to the English language. It's very difficult to say, and as well in Spanish it's very difficult to say. So let's take away that complication, because having to stretch your mouth so much with one word, again, like I said with the or sound, could smash words and sounds together, creating confusion, misunderstanding, and later on, conflict. The last thing we're going to talk about are numbers. So we've just onboarded Theo. Theo is talking about everything, and we're clarifying all the information of her contract. Theo, you're going to be getting 15,000 euros a year brutos, gross, as we say in English. And she stops and she goes, excuse me? And you say, yeah, 15,000 euros. And she said, I think you might be mistaken here. And hopefully you are, because 15,000 euros to move from one country to another, 15, might not be worth it. However, 50, TY sound, the T sound, is a lot more worthwhile for Theo. And that's what she understood when she came into the company. So even something simple such as talking about numbers might be very important. The next we're going to talk about ordinal and cardinal numbers, because in Spanish we tend to use the cardinal numbers for pretty much everything except the order of things. So in English, when we talk about days of the week, or sorry, days of the month or dates, we might say the 7th of June. Whereas in Spanish, 7 de junio, the 7 of June is a cardinal number. So understanding that in the dates can be very important, because if you want to talk to Theo on the 14th of March, it might take her a second. She might understand it. It might not be a big problem, but it's very important to get the most accuracy possible when we're trying to give a good first impression. So making sure that we have that for the dates is important. The TH sound or the ordinal numbers. Whereas cardinal numbers we use for codes, we use for other numbers, and then we talk about time, We've talked about dates and we'll talk about years as well. So time is not that different. However, in the UK and in the US, for example, they tend to use the 12-hour clock. So instead of the at 17 hours, I will see you, they will say at 5 o'clock, I will see you, 5 p.m. So you have the AM, which is antemeridian, and PM, postmeridian. And this literally means before noon and afternoon. So before noon, AM would start at 12 midnight and finish at 11:59 AM, just before 12 noon in the middle of the day. And then the PM would start from 12 noon in the middle of the day until 11:59 PM in the middle of the night. Then we want to take a look at years, because you might hear people talking about the years and there is confusion because in English, something unusual happened at the turn of the century. We went from the kind of phone number format, the French phone number format, 1999 and 1987 to 2000, not 20, 2000 or 2000, no, 2000. And that kind of continued until we got to 2010 or 2010. After that, you can go back to the phone number format because it's difficult to say 2009, 2008. You would simply say in those years between 2000 and 2010 or 2010, 2000 or 2000 and the year, 2007, 2003. So it is important with that sometimes. I think maybe it's less relevant now, but to be aware of it when somebody's talking about their history, if Theo is talking about when she went to school in 2001, that you don't get caught up wondering, is it not 2001? No, it's 2001. Then finally, like I said before, we use cardinal numbers for codes, for phone numbers and so on. But in the UK and in Ireland, we also include O instead of 0. So if we're talking about a phone number, I might say my phone number in Ireland was 087 602 03 044. It wasn't. But imagine all of those O's. Where is that sound coming from? It's just coming from the fact that the 0 and the O look very similar, and through habit, people have used that in the past. Also giving your code, your identification number. Maybe Theo isn't thinking about that. Instead of saying 0, she's saying O. Not O as in she's surprised, O is in the number 0. Okay. Having touched a bit on numbers, having touched a bit on pronunciation, and having looked a little bit on false friends, we're going to go to the next thing, which is the key strategies to improve communication with your new international talent. So we know what we want to achieve. We want to achieve a clear, complete, understandable, well-communicated onboarding meeting with Theo. We know where our difficulties may lie as Spanish speakers. We have our false friends, which are not fun sometimes, or very fun in other contexts, but not in the context of bringing somebody into the company from outside and from a different culture and a different background, like we said, even a different company culture. We can see what we want to do, what we want to achieve. We can see the obstacles such as false friends, such as pronunciation, the E sound, or the V sound, or the R sound, or silent letters, and words that begin with S and T, street. And also numbers, which we literally just finished, with the cardinals, the ordinals, times, dates, and the differences between the T sound and the teen sound. We need to come up with a way of putting all these together. And here I'll highlight some kind of strategies rather than tips. Let's call them strategies, because a tip is very open and closed. A strategy is a place from where you can start and then you can adjust it to your needs. So let's look at the strategy of keeping your information short. This is something that I always struggle with, and I've learned over the years that keeping my information short, keeping my answers short, direct, sincere, and specific It saves me a lot of time, it saves my colleagues a lot of time, it saves my superiors a lot of time, and a lot of stress as well, because you cannot argue with information. You can only receive it and do with it what you can. So making your communication simple. This is really important, especially when you're onboarding somebody from a different country. You do not want to overcomplicate the explanation or the onboarding, because the moment you do, that's where the confusion starts, that's where the conflict will start, and that's where the poor performance on behalf of Theo in this instance, if she doesn't understand her role very well, or if she's misunderstood something in the process of learning her role. Not to over-explain, Theo, what happens if Theo understood in the onboarding procedure before her first meeting that it was 3 and 2, that would be the work division, and it would be hybrid. So her understanding when she heard that was 3 days at home, 2 days in the office. When you actually need her in the office 3 days and at home 2 days if she wants, that's going to create a lot of confusion for Theo. And maybe it's not what she expected, but better to be slightly disappointed at the beginning than to find herself in a lot of trouble further down the line when her manager is asking her, why are you not showing up the 3 days we have asked of you? Establishing that information is important. So explaining to her, Theo, according to our policy in the workplace, you have a hybrid schedule, which means that you're expected to be in the office on 3 days, and you're expected to, or you have the option of working from home on the 2 other days that you are there. There she might go, I don't understand. Well, that's a very direct and specific thing. I understood something different during the process. Well, we're very sorry that if you misunderstood that, but as per company policy, this is how it works. Being specific, like we said, that's a very specific and targeted piece of information. In the spirit of keeping things short, I'll move on to the next. Making sure questions are key. I mentioned at the beginning that asking questions is important for lots of things, especially when you're trying to understand Theo's position or her understanding of the position when she's joining the new company. So understand your new team member, get a little bit more of a background. Oh, that's a really nice jacket. Where did you get it? Even small things like that create a sense of confidence in her, because you're referring to her for the information, and you're giving her the opportunity to show herself a little bit better and demonstrate herself. You know, asking questions brings out a lot of confidence in people. It also allows you to understand a lot more, and understanding is a huge way in making sure that communications from then on are pretty fluid, clean, easy. Okay, and then also for content checking or context checking, which is what we do as teachers. Instead of going, did you understand that? Asking that person to explain it back to you is very important as well. So getting Theo to explain back her understanding of the role that she has in her job and her understanding of her position in the company can allow you then to refer back to what we said before about keeping it short, making your communication more simplified, so that you can go, oh, so you did understand it was 3 days at home and 2 days in the office. So we need to go back to that last step and clear that up for you. That way you can identify problems much more quickly and much sooner. And yeah, that's the objective, no? Making things, resolving issues as soon as possible and detecting them as soon as possible and solving them as soon and as well as you can. It goes a long way in creating a future environment in the workplace that's, you know, very healthy, well communicated, happy workers are good workers, are motivated workers. Okay, so the last thing, of course, you need to do all of this, you need to practice it. So there is an old adage, practice makes perfect, but to improve on that, perfect practice makes perfect. If you're kicking a basketball every day, you're technically practicing, but you're practicing the wrong sport. So understanding where you need to be and what you need to be doing, and then practicing it is very important. So some practice is always important for new communications. If you've had this interview 10 times over the last year, it's always good to spend a little bit of time practicing and preparing for this new conversation, this new onboarding. We want Theo to get the best impression of us, that we're so ready for her to be part of the team. It looks good, but it also makes you feel better as well, and it makes Theo feel better. So there is a lot of positives aside from the it looks good. Then you have the foundations. Like I said, if you're kicking a basketball, you're not practicing basketball. You're practicing football with the wrong equipment, the wrong things. So to get the basics correct, like we said, identifying those possible errors, the B sound, or using the wrong false friend or the wrong translation of a word into a false friend, which may cause other confusion. So when you do that and you've established it, and maybe even when you're doing the questions, to maybe write out some questions and referring to a team member, like another team member, to help you out with some of these things. So you don't practice in darkness. You don't practice unguided. You're not asking somebody to hold your hand as if you're a child, but you are asking that someone can give you some feedback. Because when you practice and you get feedback, you can see where you can improve things, and you can see, I can do this better, or I can change this. This isn't the first time that I've done this presentation over the last week. I've practiced, and I know what I want to say and when I want to say it. And this is all part of the perfect practice makes perfect. Another thing you might say is practice what you preach. So I want to admit that I also include this information or these strategies, or implement these strategies when I am preparing my own work, my own presentations, and my own communications. And establishing time to practice. Like I said, it doesn't have to be long. It could be 10 minutes revising the questions that you want to ask Theo when she arrives to the company. It could be half an hour on a Saturday, maybe a call with one of your work colleagues who is also preparing something similar. Maybe not ideal on a Saturday, but maybe it's something that you cannot find any other time. But you find the time, and you not find the time. It's more about creating the time to do this practice. Like, there's always time to do things. It's a matter of making the space happen to practice as well. So establishing time to practice these skills makes future interactions much easier. And to kind of bring it all together, these are the key takeaways. So first of all, we're talking about what we want to do. We want to establish our communication with a new team member, Theo from the UK, who is maybe not very strong as Spanish, but her English is quite strong. So trying to reach her level, you might come up with some obstacles, such as false friends, trying to overcome the fear of numbers and using the wrong format of numbering, which may lead to confusion, and that can cause something else. Pronunciation, which is another very important thing, especially if Theo has no background in understanding Spanish intonation and Spanish vocalization of words. Maybe she gets very quickly lost in communication, or lost in translation, as it were. And then in terms of strategizing onboarding Theo, using these three, let's say, obstacles as focal points, we want to keep our communications short. We want to keep them accurate. We want to focus on what's the objective. So instead of telling a massive story, which is perfectly suitable in another context, during the actual conversations, we want to make the interaction as simple as possible, so that Theo has the best possible information when she starts, and that we have the best possible outcome in the onboarding. The power of questions. Like I say, questions are very important, as they can provide extra context. They can help us detect possible conflicts in the future. They can help us overcome our different well, or different interpretations of information. And then practice, practice, practice. Just get the practice in. Finding time, finding someone to help you with it, making sure that you're practicing the right thing, and making sure that if you are practicing the right thing, that you have some way of getting feedback, whether that's recording yourself talking and looking back over it, whether it's asking somebody to give you feedback in the moment, or whether it's simply just doing it, sitting with it for a moment, thinking, could I have said that better? And if yes, how? That can also be a part of it. And I mean, this webinar, it came from our intensive, which is which covers a lot of human resource skills and strategies. So, for example, in terms of onboarding, in terms of HR strategies, what we're talking about is the preparation, the strategizing of onboarding a new member of the team, while also detecting areas, for example, in terms of communication or in terms of possible conflict, strategies to navigate that, to resolve conflict, to direct the training of Theo in her work. In the selection and hiring process, this is obviously the very last step of the selection and hiring process. At this point, most of the information that we have from Theo is from interviews, it comes from her curriculum, her CV, and it comes from obviously your understanding of her, your first impression of her as well. Using the onboarding as a springboard for improving the working environment, like we said, asking the right questions, having the correct information, it is important, especially when we're talking about creating a healthy working environment. A healthy work environment is a work environment where everybody understands their place, where everybody understands their responsibilities, their roles, their relationships with other members of the team. And so having a very good understanding of Theo as she joins the company, it's giving you an advantage in terms of organizing the work environment, to prevent conflict, to improve morale in the work environment. Your office skills, well, when you're writing out your questions, you're practicing some of your writing skills, which can be translated then to emails and subsequent follow-up emails after the onboarding interview or the onboarding meeting. You also have some interpersonal skills, so such as talking and speaking with Theo, listening, active listening, and in proper interactive conversation. And then personal development. Obviously, this is targeted towards highlighting possible challenges and overcoming them using these strategies, as well as when you're identifying new information about Theo, you can take note of where her weaknesses might lie and where she might need specific training to get to the right place that she needs to be to do her work most effectively in the company. And that also is her personal development as well as personal development for you.